My brother was the golden child. I was the scapegoat. When the brakes on my Audi failed at 60 miles an hour, my last thought wasn't of fear. It was of his smiling face as he handed me the keys. Now I'm back. And this time, he's the one going down. The first thing I registered was the overwhelming, suffocating scent of my mother's signature lavender air freshener. I gasped, my hands flying to my chest, expecting to feel the crushed steering column of my Audi Q7, the shattered glass embedded in my skin, the agonizing crush of metal against bone. But there was nothing. Only the soft, high-thread count sheets of my childhood bed at the Oak Ridge Avenue estate. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I scrambled for my phone on the nightstand. The glaring screen illuminated my trembling fingers. October 14th, 2025. I dropped the phone as if it burned me. October 14th. Exactly 3 months before the boardroom meeting that destroyed my life. Exactly 3 months before my father disowned me, my fiancée walked out on me, and my brother Arthur handed me the keys to a car with severed brake lines. I dragged myself to the en-suite mirror. The woman staring back at me was pale, terrified, but completely whole. I wasn't a mangled corpse on the side of Interstate 5. I was Harley Hastings, Chief Financial Officer of Hastings Real Estate Group, and I had just been handed the ultimate weapon time. In my previous life, I was blindingly loyal. I worshipped my older brother Arthur. He was the charismatic vice president of operations, the heir apparent, the man who could charm a board of directors just as easily as he charmed our parents, Richard and Mary. I did the heavy lifting, managing the ledgers, securing the loans from Kensington Bank, and working 80-hour weeks in our Columbia Center offices in downtown Seattle. Arthur took the credit, and I was happy to let him. Until the day $4.2 million vanished from the corporate accounts, Arthur had orchestrated a masterpiece of a frame-up. He had used my administrative login to authorize wire transfers to a ghost entity called Apex Holdings LLC. He planted doctored emails on my server. When the auditors descended, he played the devastated, heartbroken brother. My parents didn't even let me speak. My father slapped me across the face, calling me a thief and a disgrace. My fiancé, Liam Cross, looked at me with manufactured disgust and handed back the engagement ring. Then came the accident, a convenient way to ensure the disgraced daughter couldn't dig up the truth. Staring at my reflection, the terror slowly evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline fury. Arthur thought I was weak. He thought I was blind. He had no idea he was dealing with a ghost. I showered, put on my sharpest navy pantsuit, and walked downstairs. The sprawling kitchen was bathed in the soft morning light. My mother Mary was sipping her Earl Grey, reading the Seattle Times, and there he was, Arthur, impeccably dressed in his tailored Tom Ford suit, Rolex gleaming on his wrist, casually scrolling through his iPad while sipping an espresso. "Morning, Harley," Arthur said, not even glancing up. His voice, smooth and perfectly modulated, sent a violent shudder down my spine. I had to dig my nails into my palms to stop myself from lunging across the marble island and wrapping my hands around his throat. "Morning, Arthur," I replied, forcing a lightness into my tone that made me nauseous. "Big day at the office?" "Always." He smiled, finally looking at me. His eyes were a pale, icy blue, the eyes of a sociopath who would murder his own sister for a balance sheet. "I'm meeting with the zoning board for the new Bellevue project. Try not to bury yourself in spreadsheets today, little sister. You need some sun." "I'll keep that in mind," I said, pouring myself a coffee. I played my part perfectly. I kissed my mother's cheek, patted Arthur's shoulder, and walked out to the garage. But the moment I sat in my car, My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles turned white. Arthur had a 3-month head start on his embezzlement scheme. The fake accounts at Kensington Bank were likely already open. The doctored emails were probably sitting in his drafts, waiting to be planted on my terminal. I needed proof. Irrefutable, undeniable proof that would not only exonerate me, but completely destroy him. Instead of driving to the Columbia Center, I took a detour to a niche electronics shop in the International District. I paid in cash for a high-end, motion-activated micro-camera small enough to fit on the head of a pin and a secondary encrypted hard drive. That evening, when Arthur was out at a networking dinner, which I now knew was just a cover for his high-stakes poker games, I slipped into his private study at his Belltown penthouse. I had kept a spare key for emergencies. I carefully positioned the micro-camera on his bookshelf, nestled perfectly within the embossed spine of his first-edition copy of The Art of War. It had a clear, unobstructed view of his mahogany desk, his laptop screen, and his safe. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the rat to take the cheese. The next 2 weeks were an agonizing exercise in psychological endurance. At work, I smiled at Arthur in boardroom meetings, praised his aggressive expansion strategies, and acted like the compliant, adoring younger sister. Behind closed doors, my office became a war room. I hired David Gable, a disgraced former fraud detective turned private investigator, whose office was nestled above a dive bar in Pioneer Square. David didn't ask questions. He just liked being paid in crisp $100 bills. I handed him a single manila folder containing the name Apex Holdings, LLC, and a list of routing numbers I had managed to pull from our company's preliminary quarterly logs. "I don't just want the shell company," I told David, sliding the envelope of cash across his scarred desk. "I want the man behind the curtain. I want to know where every single cent is bleeding out to." While David worked the streets and offshore registries, I monitored the feed from the hidden camera in Arthur's study. Night after night, I watched my brother sit at his desk. I watched him input his passwords. I watched him open the encrypted drives he thought were safe. But it wasn't until a rainy Thursday night that the real breakthrough happened. Through the camera feed, I watched Arthur, pacing frantically, his usually perfect hair disheveled. He was on a burner phone, his voice hushed but vibrating with panic. "I told you you'll get the rest of the money by December." Arthur hissed into the phone. "The transfers are slow. If I pull too much at once, my sister will notice. She's the CFO, for God's sake." "No, do not touch my family. I swear to you, Dominic, I have the $4 million. Just give me until the year-end audit." "Dominic," I froze the audio feed crackling in my earpiece. I immediately texted the name to David Gable. Within 48 hours, David was sitting in my car in a dimly lit parking garage, dropping a massive dossier onto my lap. "Your brother isn't just skimming off the top." "Harley," David said, his voice grim, lighting a cigarette despite the closed windows. "Apex Holdings isn't a corporate slush fund. It's a direct pipeline to the Caymans controlled by Dominic Russo." My blood ran cold. Dominic Russo wasn't a businessman. He was the head of one of the largest underground sports betting and loan sharking syndicates on the West Coast. "Arthur is a degenerate gambler," David continued, tapping the dossier. "He's been losing heavily on illegal offshore horse racing and high-stakes tables in Macau. He owes Russo upwards of $5 million. The deadline for the debt is January. January, the exact month I was framed and killed. It all made perfect, sickening sense. Arthur was stealing from Hastings Real Estate to pay off the mob. When the hole got too big to hide, he needed a fall guy. He needed me. But the dossier contained an even more devastating revelation. "There's something else," David said, hesitating for a fraction of a second. Rousseau's guys have been communicating with someone inside your inner circle to help facilitate the paper trail. Someone making sure the fake invoices get pushed past your desk. David handed me a printed stack of text message transcripts intercepted from the burner phones. I scanned the numbers, and a jagged piece of glass seemed to lodge itself in my throat. The number belonged to Liam Cross, my fiancé. I read the transcripts, my vision blurring. Liam and Arthur had been coordinating for months. Liam, a junior partner at a rival development firm, was promised a lucrative vice president position at Hastings Group and a massive cut of the embezzled funds once I was out of the picture. "Just keep her distracted," Arthur had texted Liam. "Keep her busy with wedding planning. I'll handle the server logs." "Don't worry," Liam had replied. "She doesn't suspect a thing. She's completely clueless." A bitter, broken laugh escaped my lips, echoing in the quiet car. The man I had shared a bed with, the man I had promised my life to, was actively helping my brother plan my destruction. They had sat at my dining table, drinking my wine, smiling at my face while digging my grave. The following Sunday, my parents hosted their monthly family dinner at Oak Ridge Avenue. The dining room was a picture of aristocratic perfection. Crystal wine glasses, a roaring fireplace, and my mother's famous roast beef. Liam sat next to me, his hand resting intimately on my thigh. Across the table, Arthur was regaling my father with a story about a recent golf game with the mayor. "We're lucky to have you, Arthur," my father Richard said, raising his glass of Cabernet. "The company is in strong hands. And you, Harley," he added almost as an afterthought. "You're doing a fine job keeping the books balanced." "Thank you, Dad," I said, offering a demure, sickeningly sweet smile. Underneath the table, Liam squeezed my hand. "We make a great team," he whispered, kissing my temple. I turned to look at Liam, really looking into his warm hazel eyes. I saw the hollowness there, the calculated deception. I looked at Arthur, basking in my father's praise, smug and untouchable. I looked at my parents, who would so easily throw me to the wolves the moment Arthur pointed a finger at me. Clueless Liam had called me. "You have no idea," I whispered back, taking a slow sip of my wine. The annual Hastings Group shareholder gala was in exactly 2 weeks. The entire board of directors, the press, and the city's elite would be gathered in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. It was the night Arthur planned to announce a record-breaking year for the company, solidifying his path to CEO. It was also the night I was going to burn his entire life to the ground. The final week leading up to the annual Hastings Group shareholder gala was a masterclass in psychological endurance. I spent my days finalizing the year-end financial reports, sitting directly across from Arthur as he confidently presented his forged revenue projections to our senior accounting team. I watched him lie with the effortless grace of a seasoned predator, his expensive Mont Blanc pen tapping rhythmically against the mahogany boardroom table. Liam was always nearby. He would drop into my office with 2 matcha lattes, kiss my cheek, and ask me how the wedding seating chart was coming along. My skin crawled every time his lips touched me, a visceral reaction that I had to mask with exhausted smiles and complaints about caterers. I played the stressed, overwhelmed bride-to-be flawlessly. It gave me the perfect excuse to lock my office door, pull the blinds, and review the devastating evidence David Gable was compiling. David had surpassed my expectations. He didn't just trace the money, he found the digital fingerprints. He recovered the deleted server logs, showing Arthur using my administrative credentials at 3:00 a.m. on a Sunday. He pulled the IP addresses, confirming the logins came directly from Arthur's Belltown penthouse. And most importantly, he managed to clone Liam's burner phone, giving us a live feed of their panicked text messages as the end-of-year audit approached. On the afternoon of the gala, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my dressing room. I was wearing a floor-length, deep emerald silk gown, the color of money, the color of envy. I fastened a simple diamond necklace around my throat, my hands perfectly steady. The terrified, heartbroken woman who had died on Interstate 5 was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating architect of ruin. Liam arrived in a custom-tailored tuxedo, smelling of Tom Ford cologne and peppermint. "You look absolutely breathtaking, Harley," he murmured, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind and looking at our reflection. The future vice president and his beautiful wife. "The future holds a lot of surprises for us, Liam," I replied softly, meeting his eyes in the mirror. I didn't smile. We took a town car to the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. The grand ballroom was a spectacle of corporate opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over 80 tables adorned with towering white orchid centerpieces. Waiters in white coats circulated with trays of champagne and caviar. The entire board of directors was present, along with the city's top developers, politicians, and the local financial press. My parents, Richard and Mary, were holding court near the main bar. My father looked powerful, a bourbon in his hand, laughing loudly at a joke made by the regional director of Kensington Bank. My mother was dressed in silver sequins, playing the gracious matriarch. And then there was Arthur. He stood near the podium, surrounded by a tight circle of admiring investors. He looked untouchable. "Nervous," Liam whispered in my ear as we took our seats at the head table. "Not in the slightest," I said, taking a sip of ice water. Dinner was served, a perfectly cooked filet mignon that tasted like ash in my mouth. I kept my eyes fixed on the massive LED screen behind the podium, currently displaying the Hastings Group logo. In the sound booth overlooking the ballroom, David Gable was sitting beside the hired AV technician. The technician thought David was a last-minute addition from the corporate PR team. He had no idea David was holding a USB drive containing enough explosive material to level the entire company. As the plates were cleared and the dessert wine was poured, my father stood up and tapped his spoon against his crystal glass. The gentle chiming cut through the low hum of conversation, drawing the room's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed partners and friends," Richard began, his voice projecting easily across the massive room. "Tonight is a celebration of resilience and vision. This year has been our most profitable in a decade, and that success is driven by the next generation of Hastings leadership. Please welcome my son and our Vice President of Operations, Arthur Hastings." The ballroom erupted into applause. Arthur buttoned his tuxedo jacket and strode confidently up the steps to the stage. He adjusted the microphone, flashing his signature disarming smile. "Thank you, Dad," Arthur said smoothly. "And thank you all for being here. When I look out at this room, I don't just see investors. I see partners in a grand vision for this city's skyline." Arthur launched into his speech. It was brilliant, charismatic, and entirely fabricated. He threw out inflated numbers, praised his own aggressive acquisition strategies, and painted a picture of endless upward momentum. I watched the board members nodding in aggressive agreement. I watched Liam smiling proudly from his seat beside me. "As we look to the new year," Arthur continued, raising his hands expansively, "we are preparing to announce a massive capital reinvestment program. A program that will ensure the Hastings legacy for—" "Actually, Arthur," I said. I hadn't shouted, but I had spoken directly into the wireless lavalier microphone pinned to the neckline of my dress, which David had discreetly routed to override the main PA system. My voice echoed off the gilded ceiling, cutting Arthur off mid-sentence. The entire room froze. 400 pairs of eyes snapped toward me. I stood up, slowly pushing my chair back. The heavy silence was deafening. Arthur's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes narrowing into cold slits before he recovered his composure. "Harley," Arthur said, forcing a chuckle into the microphone, "I think my little sister has had a bit too much champagne, folks. We can save the toasts for later. I haven't had a drop, Arthur." I said, my voice dangerously calm and echoing through the massive speakers. "But since we are discussing the financial future of the Hastings Group, I thought the board of directors might appreciate a more accurate presentation of the fourth quarter ledgers." My father stood up, his face flushing dark red. "Harley, sit down immediately. You are embarrassing yourself." "On the contrary, Dad," I said, stepping away from the table and walking slowly toward the center of the room. "I'm saving this company." David hit play. The massive LED screen behind Arthur flickered violently, dropping the corporate logo. In its place, a stark, high-definition spreadsheet appeared. The room gasped collectively. It was a side-by-side comparison. On the left, the fabricated financial report Arthur had just submitted to the board. On the right, the true ledgers highlighting a gaping $4.2 million deficit. "What the hell is this?" Arthur barked, turning to look at the screen, his face draining of color. "Cut the feed security." "Security is staying exactly where they are," I said, my voice slicing through his panic. "Take a good look, everyone. That deficit isn't a market fluctuation. It's theft." Before Arthur could rip the cables from the podium, the screen shifted. It displayed a terrifyingly clear video feed from the hidden camera in his study. The pristine audio of my brother's voice blasted through the ballroom's surround sound system. "I told you you'll get the rest of the money by December. The transfers are slow. If I pull too much at once, my sister will notice. She's the CFO, for God's sake. No, do not touch my family. I swear to you, Dominic, I have the $4 million. Just give me until the year-end audit." The collective intake of breath from the 400 guests sucked the oxygen out of the room. A woman at the Kensington Bank table dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the marble floor with a sharp, violent crack. Arthur stumbled backward, bumping into the podium. The smooth, charismatic executive was gone, replaced by a trapped, hyperventilating animal. He stared at the screen in pure horror. "Dominic Russo," I announced, projecting my voice over the rising murmur of the crowd. "A man currently under investigation by the FBI for illegal sports betting and extortion. That is where your dividends are going, ladies and gentlemen, to pay off the vice president's gambling debts." "It's a lie," Arthur screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She forged it. Harley is trying to frame me. She's always been jealous." "I thought you might say that," I replied coldly. "Which brings me to my fiancée." The screen shifted again. This time it displayed a scrolling transcript of text messages, complete with timestamps and phone numbers. The name Liam Cross was highlighted in bright, unforgiving yellow. "Just keep her distracted. Keep her busy with wedding planning. I'll handle the server logs." "Don't worry. She doesn't suspect a thing. She's completely clueless." Liam, who had been frozen in his chair, suddenly shot up. The color had vanished from his face, leaving him looking like a panicked ghost. "Harley, wait. Let me explain. It's out of context." "Save it for the police." "Liam," I snapped, the icy venom in my tone, stopping him dead in his tracks. My father was gripping the edge of the head table so hard, the table shook. "Arthur!" Richard choked out his voice, a gravelly whisper of disbelief. "Tell me this isn't real. Tell me you didn't steal from this family." Arthur didn't answer. He couldn't. He looked at the exits, but the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom were already opening. David Gable walked in, followed by 4 uniformed Seattle police officers and 2 plainclothes detectives. Panic erupted. Board members began shouting. Reporters pulled out their phones, flashing photographs of the damning evidence still glowing on the massive screen. Arthur snapped. With a primal rage-filled scream, he abandoned the podium and lunged off the stage directly toward me. His hands were outstretched, aiming for my throat. "You little bitch, I'll kill you!" He didn't make it 2 steps. 2 nearby waiters, who were actually off-duty officers David had hired for extra security, tackled Arthur to the floor. The sound of his chin hitting the polished marble was a sickening thud. "Arthur Hastings!" One of the detectives stated loudly, pulling Arthur's arms behind his back and securing the steel cuffs with a sharp click. "You are under arrest for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." Another officer approached Liam, who was standing frozen by his chair, crying silently. They cuffed him without a struggle. The man who had planned to drink my wine over my grave was now sobbing like a terrified child. I stood completely still, watching them drag my brother toward the exit. Arthur wrenched his head around his eyes, wild and bloodshot, locking onto mine. "You're dead, Harley," he screamed, his voice cracking hysterically. "You hear me? You're nothing." "I was nothing," I said softly, knowing he couldn't hear me over the chaos. "Now I am everything." As the police hauled Arthur and Liam out of the room, my mother collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands, weeping hysterically. My father stood paralyzed, staring at the empty space where his golden boy had just been, his entire legacy shattered in less than 5 minutes. The room was a frantic swarm of shouting investors and flashing cameras. The chairman of the board, an elderly man named Harrison, pushed through the crowd and stopped in front of me. He looked at the stage, then at the crying ruins of my parents, and finally at me. "Ms. Hastings," Harrison said, his voice trembling slightly. "The money, is it gone? The money Arthur stole is gone." "Yes," I replied, my voice steady, projecting absolute authority. "But I have already initiated asset freezes on all of Arthur's personal holdings, and I have filed a civil suit against Liam Cross's firm for damages. I am convening an emergency board meeting tomorrow at 8:00 a.m. We are going to clean house, Harrison, and we are going to rebuild." Harrison stared at me, seeing me for the first time, not as Richard's quiet daughter, but as the only person capable of holding the foundation together. He nodded slowly. I turned and walked out of the ballroom. I didn't look back at my parents. I didn't look back at the shattered champagne glasses or the frantic reporters. I stepped out into the crisp, cold Seattle night air. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs completely. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, the air tasted perfectly, beautifully clean. Thank you for watching this story of ultimate betrayal, shocking revenge, and taking back control. If you were thrilled by Arthur's dark secrets being exposed, and Harley's ruthless payback at the gala, please hit that like button to show your support. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who love a dramatic twist, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more real-life Reborn stories and intense family dramas. Drop a comment below on what you would have done